And the United Nations General Assembly has suspended Russia from the Human Rights Council. 93 countries voted in favor of the draft resolution, 24 countries voted against it, 58 countries abstained. Among the countries which did abstain was India. India continues to believe that being right down the middle in the situation between Russia and Ukraine serves our national interests at this stage. Abstentions didn't count and therefore for any vote, but by the end of the day, the numbers clearly stacked up against Russia. Can you imagine a founding member of the United Nations, a key member of the United Nations Human Rights Council has been suspended from the Human Rights Council? It clearly indicates that global support for Russia at this juncture, perhaps its lowest ever in light of their invasion of Ukraine.
Abstained on the resolution adopted in the General Assembly today. We do so for reasons of both substance and process. Since the inception of the Ukrainian conflict, India has stood for peace, dialogue and diplomacy. We believe that no solution can be arrived at by shedding blood and at the cost of innocent lives. If India has chosen any side, it is the side of peace, and it is for an immediate end to violence. We continue to remain deeply concerned at the worsening situation and reiterate our call for end to all hostilities. When innocent human lives are at stake, diplomacy must prevail as the only viable option. Recent reports of civilian killings in Busha are deeply disturbing. We have unequivocally condemned these killings and support the call for an independent investigation. The impact of the crisis has also been felt beyond the region with increasing food and energy costs, especially for many developing countries. It is in our collective interest to work constructively, both inside the United Nations and outside, towards seeking an early resolution to the conflict. India has been at the forefront of protecting human rights, right from the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We firmly believe that all decisions should be taken fully respecting due process, as all our democratic polity and structures enjoin us to do so. This applies to international organizations as well, particularly the United Nations.
Well, India choosing to abstain in that key vote, which means that Russia, in a sense, would be upset with India, and the West would also be continuing to put pressure on India to not endorse Russia directly or even indirectly. Now, if you look at Russia, in fact, there were indicators that Russia had indicated to India that, look, an abstention this time around was not good enough. India needed to vote in favor of Russia. India choosing not to do that, and in fact went to the extent, and as has been the case in the recent past, of strongly criticizing human rights abuses or the situation in Bucha, where India says that there needs to be an international probe looking into what really happened. At the same time, India, by abstaining, has not fallen into what the West and the United States would have wanted India to do. In other words, give a clear-cut statement where India actually says that, look, what Russia is doing is wrong. India's statements have been very measured in line of our foreign policy, but just as an indicator of how India remains very closely invested in the diplomatic process with the United States. The Foreign Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, the Defense Minister, Mr. Rajnath Singh, will be traveling to the United States for the annual 2+2 meetings, where they will be meeting their counterparts in defense and international. The international, of course, the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken.
Right, thank you so much, Vishnu, for providing us clarity on both the big stories we're tracking. Meanwhile, switching tracks, the CBI was ordered by a court to immediately drop the lookout circular or airport alert against former Amnesty International India chief Akar Patel, who was stopped from flying to the United States yesterday. The investigating agency was also asked to hand over a written apology to Mr. Patel, given the mental harassment he had suffered. A special CBI court has said, and I quote, "In this case, a written apology from the head of the CBI, i.e. the director, acknowledging the lapse on part of his subordinate to applicant would go a long way in not only healing wounds of applicant, but also upholding trust and confidence of the public in the premier institution." However, Mr. Patel had approached the court after he was stopped from boarding his flight to the US at the Bengaluru airport, and the latest update is Akar Patel has tweeted that he has been stopped at immigration yet again. His tweet says, "The CBI has not taken me off their lookout circular." And switching tracks, the centre has denied reports of the new coronavirus XE variant. In India, the Union Health Ministry said that the present evidence does not suggest the presence of the XE variant of COVID, denying media reports that claim that a case of the new mutant was reported in Mumbai. Meanwhile, India reported 1,033 new COVID cases in the last 24 hours, 4.8% lower than yesterday. But India also saw 43 COVID deaths. The daily positivity rate was recorded as 0.23% and the weekly positivity rate was 0.22% as per the Health Ministry. Now, CNG prices in the national capital were hiked for the second day in a row by 2.5 rupees per kilogram, taking the total increase since March to 12.5 rupees per kg. Here's a report.
53-year-old Kavita Agarwal, a housewife in Delhi, relies on cabs for her day-to-day travel. But the rising CNG prices are burning a hole in the household budget.
जैसे 150 दे रहे थे तो वहाँ अब 200 में ही मिलेगा। किराया जब भी देखते हैं बढ़ा हुआ, जैसे हम सामान लेते हैं 10-15 दिन में जब भी जाते हैं तो देखते हैं कि बढ़ के ही दिखता है उसमें, लेकिन अब रेट इतना ज़्यादा बढ़ता जा रहा है तो सोचना पड़ेगा कि भाई ऑटो से ही जाएं क्या।
30-year-old Akshay is a financial consultant in Delhi and uses cabs frequently to travel for work.
Earlier, which I used to travel around 10 kilometers, is used to cost me around 150 to 200, and I can see it to 250 now.
CNG prices have been touching the roof, with a hike of 7 rupees per kg in Mumbai and 2.5 rupees per kg in the national capital, cities where both cabs and autos run on CNG. This is the third price rise in just last 7 days. In Delhi, the price of CNG is currently 69.11 rupees per kg. In Noida, Greater Noida and Ghaziabad, it is 71.67 rupees, while in Gurugram, it is 76.34 rupees per kg and in Mumbai, it is 67 rupees per kg. Mumbai is best. The city's bus service provider is plying more electric buses as part of its climate action plan, and that has helped the fuel budget. But app-based cabs in Mumbai are saving every penny they can. Ola and Uber cab drivers say sometimes they request customers to avoid an AC, especially when stuck in the Mumbai traffic.
यहाँ पर बहुत सारा ट्रैफिक है, बहुत ज़्यादा ही ट्रैफिक है, तो एक सिग्नल क्रॉस करने में कम से कम बीकेसी में, मैं कल का बात बता रहा हूँ, तो बीकेसी में एक सिग्नल क्रॉस करने का 20 मिनट चला गया मेरे को। तो गाड़ी स्टार्ट रहेगा, एसी चालू रहेगा, तो वो तो खर्चा होना ही होना है, सीएनजी का ज़्यादा खर्चा।
तुम लोग एसी चला रहे हो नहीं चला?
चलाते हैं ना, विंडो बंद कर लो।
As our cab arrives, we notice the air conditioning is switched off, but on request, the driver switches it on. Some cab drivers say the government needs to intervene in the functioning of cab companies.
ओला उबर की मनमानी नहीं चलनी चाहिए। ये लोग पता है क्या करते हैं मैम, इतना फेयर बढ़ा दिया इन्होंने, तो उसमें हम लोगों को इतना नहीं दे रहे हैं, मतलब कंपनी बहुत अमाउंट इसमें ले रही है बीच में।
Opposition parties have been protesting against the rising fuel prices, but the government has defended itself, citing the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the fluctuation in prices globally. With Saurabh Gupta in Mumbai and camera person Kanan Patra in New Delhi, this is Sukirti Dwivedi for NDTV.
Switching tracks to a shocker from Madhya Pradesh, where a group of men, including a journalist and theatre artist, were seen stripped down to their underwears inside a police station in Madhya Pradesh's Siddhi district in a post that has now gone viral. The 8 men were seen standing against the wall with their hands clasped in front. A local journalist and YouTuber who was identified in the photo alleged he was abused, beaten up and asked to strip by some police personnel when he went to cover a protest against a local BJP MLA. The incident allegedly happened on Saturday in MP Siddhi district when the journalist went to cover the protest against the arrest of theatre artist Neeraj Kundar for making alleged indecent remarks against BJP MLA Kedar Nath Shukla and his son Kedar Gurudat Shukla using a fake Facebook profile. Kanishk Tiwari, the journalist, claimed he and his camera person were arrested and charged with several sections, including trespassing and disturbance of public peace.
जो सिटी कोतवाली थाने की पुलिस थी, उसके द्वारा जबरन जो है मुझे धक्का देकर कोतवाली के अंदर ले जाया गया, मुझे मारा गया, पीटा गया, निर्वस्त्र किया गया, कपड़े उतरवाए गए, थाने में जुलूस निकलवाया गया और ये कहा गया कि विधायक और पुलिस के खिलाफ खबर चलाओगे तो तुम्हारा पूरे शहर में चड्डी पहना कर जुलूस निकालूंगा।
Switching tracks to the latest in Sri Lanka, where the country has been plunged into political turmoil with President Gotabaya Rajapaksa under pressure to resign as protests escalate over an economic crisis. The island nation of 22 million people is experiencing acute shortages of food, fuel and other essentials, along with record inflation and crippling power cuts, which have inflicted widespread misery in the most painful downturn since independence from Britain in 1948. My colleague Srija reports from Ground Zero.
For you as a common man, can you tell us how difficult the situation is?
It's very difficult because last I think about a month now, we are waiting every day for diesel in the queues for hours. Some people are staying in the queues for days. So even for now, I have been waiting for 4 hours in this queue.
So NDTV is here reporting right outside the National Hospital in Colombo, one of the largest hospitals. Here we see doctors who are staging a protest. If you can tell us, what is the present situation inside the hospital?
We feel that there is an impending disaster because of this dollar crisis and the economic crisis. So with no time, there will be shortages of a lot of important drugs like life-saving drugs, as well as the surgical equipment and the surgical materials.
We have to cut down the surgeries as well as to give in medical treatment because of the very essential drugs and also drugs used for the non-communicable diseases like the diabetic, hypertension, even the cancer and the kidney disease and liver disease. All the drugs are getting shortage in the country.
The other big story, Chinese state-sponsored hackers targeted Indian electricity distribution centres near Ladakh over the last 8 months, a report by private intelligence firm Recorded Future said, in a new potential flashpoint following a protracted military standoff between the two countries in the region. The government said the attacks were not successful. Now, speaking to NDTV, Union Minister of Power R.K. Singh said these probing attacks keep happening. It is not a one-off. He added, our cyber policy is working, it's functional, and it is strong.
A report by a leading international private intelligence firm, Recorded Future, has stated, in fact, it's the largest group looking at online security, enterprise security. It's a new potential flashpoint between India and China following a protracted military standoff between the two countries. The government has said the attacks are not successful, but they do accept, and this is what the report says, that this was an attempt to probe critical Indian infrastructure. The report says that there was a prolonged targeting of Indian power grid assets. In fact, seven power distribution centers were in fact targeted. Chinese hackers probe critical infrastructure systems in locations that you saw just a few moments back flashing on your screens. What's more, there was a compromise of India's national security response system. In other words, in addition to power generation infrastructure assets, the hackers also managed to breach the systems of one of the Indian groups meant to ward off such attacks. Now, the Indian subsidiary of an international multinational logistics company was also targeted. The attacks took place between August and March 2022. And here's the bottom line. While this could have been a probe, and were our cyber defenses strong enough to ensure that our power grid is not switched off in the future or disrupted by Chinese hackers? Now, the government has accepted that this did take place, but they say fortunately there was no real damage.
We had information of these attacks. When they happened, we got information. We interacted with the concerned states and the SLDCs and the RLDCs, and we reviewed our cyber defenses. This is not a one-off thing. This has happened in the past as well, and will no doubt happen in the future as well. We only have to be prepared.